the organisation of this conference. I think it's been extremely interesting. The topic that you've thrown at us, in other words, to think forward 10 years, has, I think, proven to be extremely clever. We haven't answered all the questions. There's been some speculation, but it is a useful exercise. And it's nice to climb out of the preoccupation with Brexit and all that gloom that we often have in this country. Just on Brexit and all that gloom, as you probably know, my own opinion has been for a long time that if we are to go back, we can't achieve that on our own forces. It isn't any point in expecting us that a push from Britain is going to be sufficient. We need in a pull, but a strong pull, and a clever pull from Brussels and all the other member states. And here, I think it's important for us to understand that the full importance and impact consequences of Brexit has not yet been fully appreciated in the EU. In an awful lot, the appalling political crisis here has sort of proven that it was a good thing that the Brits left. And in a sense that they blame Brexit on the foolishness of the Brits, but they do not try at the same time fairly to go through a period of self-appraisal, of self-critical criticism, to ask themselves if there are deficiencies in the structure of the EU and its processes that were partly a cause or a contributory factor to Brexit. And it's in this context that the current spur of discussion, reflection on treaty change has occurred. Of course, as has been pointed out earlier, the primary factor in triggering this refreshing bout of political reform is Ukraine. Because it's not only Ukraine that has applied to join the EU. And if Ukraine comes in, it isn't going to be on its own. It is to be with several countries of the Western Balkans and probably Moldova too. So the scale in political terms and in pressure on the institutions and the courts and the commission and the parliament is a lot greater than we might think. And as we go further to ponder the implications of Ukraine as a member state, I think that the problematique of how it affects the whole of the structure of the union is to be more exposed. And then a second issue is the lack of progress that we have made not in all areas. And Molly has explained extremely clearly the progress that has been made in a lot of green legislation. But in a lot of other areas, especially of fiscal union and the rule of law, there has not been progress. And in some ways, we've gone backwards. The promises that were granted have not been fulfilled. There is a tremendously strong disagreement on migration, both internally in the Schengen area. Incidentally, at present, the Schengen area is suspended. It really hardly works. And of course, extreme disagreement, especially between France and Germany, on just how we approach the external irregular pressures of migration. And we also have, as we see very colourfully in the crisis over Palestine, a shambles of a foreign policy where there is really no consensus between a number of the principal players, including France and Germany, on a common foreign and security policy. Now, as a result of all this, the first reflections on treaty change are emerging. The Parliament in December will vote on a very large package of proposals to change the treaty. It's not a perfect package because it's a parliament, it's a parliamentary exercise. So there are glitches and an absence of what one might call polish. But it's an impressive catalogue of proposals. The principal proposal is that we need to change the decision-making procedure of the passerelle clause, the bridging clause that can permit decisions of the council across the board to become qualified majority vote. At present, under the Treaty of Lisbon, you can only deploy that passerelle clause if everyone agrees. And of course, everyone does not agree. And so, in effect, the passerelle clause is inoperable. If you want to look further at that, it is the Article 48.7 of the TEU, which is the principal blockage to the democratization of decision-making in the council and to increase the capacity of that institution to act. After the Parliament spurred this exercise, the Commission is now climbing in on the act. And that's partly because von der Leyen has, I think, chosen to have a second term as the Commission President. And in order to achieve that, she needs the support of the Parliament. But still, the Commission has been awfully absent from these institutional discussions for too long. It's a classical function as a think tank for us all, which it was very prominent in that exercise of thinking, strategic thoughts under the law days, but has been declining effective for the last decades. It now tries underline to return. And the Commission has promised what it calls pre-enlargement critique of all the policies and the institutions of the Union as it is. And that is promised to be published in the spring of next year. In other words, before the elections to the Parliament. And that will look at budgetary reform, institutions, and policy. And to complement that, Mario Draghi has been asked and has agreed, thank heavens, to think about competitiveness and the economy. And as we know, Draghi is a cast iron federalist, and I'm certain he will come up with a very strong critique of things as they are. And if Parliament and the Commission and Draghi agree, it will put great pressure on the Council to agree by simple majority, which it can do, to call a fresh convention to change the treaty. I wouldn't expect there to be much progress on that before the elections to the Parliament, but the autumn of next year and the spring of 2025 ought to see these qualitative leap forward for political integration. In that exercise, one will have to demarcate the things that we agree further centralization is required, and the areas of policy where the opposite can happen. And I would suggest that the CAP, the agricultural policy, is a good candidate for decentralization, but governance of the EU is obviously an important place to look for further centralization. This will include electoral reform of the European Parliament, so that transnational lists, which is an old friend of mine, comes back up the agenda. It will include a reform of the financing rules of the EU. It will include a aggrandizement of the powers of the Court of Justice to become closer to what one would recognize as a federal Supreme Court. It will include strengthening the functions of the central bank so that it can become the lender of last resort of the EU. That is to say, supporting properly federal bonds, joint and several, which is what we haven't got, of course, at present. On institutional terms, it will have to have a look at the presidency of the Commission and the Council, which at present is bifurcated, and it's not working awfully well, as you can see, almost daily clashes between von der Leyen and the president of the European Council, Charles Michel. The closer we are to a federal critique of the future reform of the EU, we will see the conference of the political community that was sponsored by Macron to become a lot more important than it actually is at present. It will be structured properly, run by the EU, and pointing towards the concept of a security council of the EU. A further and important institutional reform will be the creation of affiliate membership, which will be a sort of second-class membership of the EU, which is a place where Britain could find a parking place, where countries at present who are in the EU, which would seek a visa, a connection to the federal core, would find a place to be. I have argued for that for some time, and I know that the Commission and Parliament in drafting, in framing its policies for the convention, which will have to be called to change the treaty, that second-class, partial, affiliate membership will, I think, find its place. So, how is the EU going to be in 10 years' time? It will be more imperial, I think. It will have taken on greater responsibility for the domestic policies of the member states, but also for the external policies of its neighborhood. It will require stronger government, and that will be more centrally posed, placed in the Commission, as opposed to the Council. it will be in a much stronger position than it is now to exercise both soft power and hard power in terms of military and security policy. It will extend its regulatory framework, both domestically and externally, across the continent. And I think that in a more stronger, more powerful profile of the EU, the British, if they're intelligently governed, and if we can approach afresh a bipartisan approach to the formulation of EU policy, that the British will be pleased afresh to take our place. In a sense, we will either become more federal as a union, or we will disintegrate as our opponents, both external and internal, would clearly prefer that we did. So I'm very grateful for this opportunity to come back to the Federal Trust to rehearse a few of these old ideas and to encourage you, Brendan, to further and greater work, which will have an impact, of course, domestically in all the political parties, but also in Brussels and other member states too.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Up. And another thing.
Macron is only 45 years old.
So he'll live to see our rejoining the European Union. Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. We've had a very interesting day. I think the whole point of or not the whole point, but one point of the conference was to raise questions and to answer them. You've given some answers and raised some further questions. I think that's an excellent note on which to finish. But two things I want to say. Thank you very much to the James Madison Trust and to David in particular for helping us in organising this. And a special thanks to Ulrika for making progress. Who joined us on the day? Thank you very much indeed, Sue. The future Federal Trust organisation events will be very partly organised by me, but mostly by Ulrika. So that would be a guarantee of high quality, and hope to see you at future European events. Thank you very much indeed, Andrew. Thank you very much. Have a good trip home. Thank you.